One of the things that I encourage everybody to do is just work under the assumption that what they said is not what they meant. Work under the assumption that the question they asked you is camouflaging a question that they really want to ask. Assume that going in. Assume that you don't have a complete picture of what the other side is going through, dealing with, what their environment is like, because you don't have the complete picture. I've known Marcella for most of her life. I can sit down and have a conversation with Marcella. I guarantee you, in every conversation that I have that we have together, I learn something new because you don't, and it's not because she's hiding stuff from me, but if you don't engage everybody all the time with a curious mindset, you're going to be missing parts of the puzzle. The original title for this today's call, or topic for today's call, was handling objections. What is an objection? If you believe, as I do, that anybody anywhere on the planet would do anything for you if two things were true. Number one, it's within their capability, and number two, they trust you. So, if someone is hitting you with an objection, what are they really saying to you? They're telling you that there's no trust there, or not to the level that they need it to be. So, instead of freaking out and start, as Nick said, start caving in, your question should be, why am I still considered a threat in this conversation? That's not a question that you ask them directly. That's a question you should be asking yourself. Why am I still a threat to this person? When you start the conversation, you are a threat. But to maintain that status throughout the course of the conversation, you're you're doing something wrong. Pitches are going by and you're not getting the bat off your shoulder. It's cool for you to be viewed as a threat at the beginning of the conversation because you're automatically going to be. I mentioned this, I think, on the last call. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how long I've known Marcella. If I'm going to make an ask of her, no matter how small or innocuous the ask is, she's going to be in a defensive posture because an ask changes the status quo of the person who's being asked. You're putting work on their plate that does not exist currently. And anytime you change someone's status quo, you are a threat to them. Status quo is such because it's comfortable. We don't like our status quo being changed because that introduces uncertainty into our lives. And if and uncertainty is the mother of fear. When things are uncertain, we get frightened. So even if my ask is relatively small in the grand scheme of things, she's going to be defensive. Anytime that you engage in a conversation with someone else and the words want or need are in either head, you guys have heard me say this before, it's automatically going to be a negative conversation. It's on some level. I don't mean that your guys are going to be cussing at each other and throwing stuff across the desk, but if Nick and I are going to sit down to talk about partnering, a business partnership, even though Nick and I are friends, even though Nick and I have been exposed to each other for several years now, he knows that at the end of that conversation, he's going to come out of it shorter, either in time or money or both, than what he goes in with. And so, even though we're friends, internally, he's got his hands up. So I'm a threat at the beginning of that conversation. I should not still be a threat by the time I ultimately get to my ask. If I am, I got to take a strong look at myself and ask myself, what am I missing? Because an objection is nothing but them saying, still don't trust you yet, buddy. You got a lot more work to do.
Well, and I would take your point. You mentioned objections and a lack of trust, but that objection could also be to Derek's other thing that has to be true for somebody to do something for you, and that's it's not within their capabilities. But you don't know that. You don't know if a pushback and objections. I know a lot of people think of them as the sales world, but it's anything. It's any pushback or any impasse in the conversation where you hit this wall and you're trying to figure your way around it. You got to ask yourself those two questions when somebody pushes back. All right, is it because they don't trust me, or is it because this isn't within their capabilities? And if you always trust that, oh, it's probably just not within their capabilities, you're going to cave to things like the gentleman did earlier that I talked about. So ask those questions to yourself when you get pushbacks. Do they not trust me? Is this not within their capabilities? All right, let me tackle the trust thing first. And then if the objection is still there, maybe it's not within their capabilities. Now it's probably an appropriate time to shift them into problem solving mode and begin to ask some what and how questions to get them to come up with the solution rather than you just starting to plug holes. So that's one thing that I am kind of subconsciously always thinking, like, did I do something to lose their trust? Maybe they're being serious about this pushback and it's really not something that they can do. Well, I better test it before I start to try to solve the problem. And that's the mistake that the majority of people that we deal with, or that we coach and train, make, is that they don't take that time. They just take the words at face value and immediately start to try to plug holes with their solutions. And a majority of the time, you don't need to do that because it's not advantageous to you, and because there's a good chance the person may need to vent about something else